Well, that's actually a really good question because there's two answers to it because you first have the change that's occurred in China and looking at, the old, remember those green trains that we used to have here, and they would, Ingwo, Ingzuo, hey buddy. And then you have the comparison of what the train systems are like in the United States versus here in China today, or the comparison over the past 30 years. In terms of China, and I'll be completely upfront, I don't really travel much on trains at this point in time, but back in the day, especially when I first got here, we used to have this fun game we would play with a couple of the foreigners where we would go to the old Shanghai train station and, we would pick a time and say, okay, 1:40 in the afternoon, and whatever train was at 1:40, we would just get on. And wherever it went, and at some point, we would either get off or it would stop, and we'd travel all through Jiangsu and Zhejiang and what have you, and it was a ton of fun. You just meet different people, you drink beer, eat guazi, all that kind of good stuff. And I've done some overnight trains and what have you with the sort of 3-bunk sort of sit down and overnight trains and what have you. Now, it's the first thing that I recommend to all foreigners is that when they come to China, and I've said this in previous videos, the first thing you want to do is you want to go to Shenzhen, and then the second thing you're going to want to do is take an overnight train or a high-speed train from Shenzhen all the way to Chongqing. And without question, every foreigner I talk to that takes the high-speed trains here in China is just shockingly amazed. And the fascinating thing is, it's not just the Americans, it's the Europeans as well. The Japanese are kind of used to it, but not most Westerners. So it's just in, 15 years, the amount of actual expansion in the high-speed rail system has been phenomenal. And I even joke with my American sort of contacts, family, what have you, is if you look at the global financial crisis, you had the Americans that spent all this money to save the banks, and China spent a ton of money as well. But what did they do with it? Well, one of the big things they did was they built this high-speed rail system. So it's like, did we save the banks or did we build really impressive infrastructure? So that was impressive. But then you look at the United States, and the classic example that people make is California. California was trying to build a high-speed, they still are, a high-speed rail from San Francisco to LA. And already it's cost like some insane $15 billion. And they've got it maybe, through a couple of, it's hardly been built because there's so much regulation and, people don't want a train going through their backyard and what have you. Then on the other side of the country, on the East Coast, we have it's a pretty famous train system called the Acela, which is part of the Amtrak system that runs from New York to Washington, D.C., and everybody complains about it. It's never on time, it's slow, God forbid it snows out, then things get really delayed. So there's just been no investment because Americans love to drive. Every American has a car. No American, unless they have to, wants to be on a train. They just want to be able to drive and drive to wherever, even if it's a 6-hour drive, they want to drive. So it's a stark difference. In China, definitely from 30 years ago to today in the types of transportation, but then even more pronounced when you look at the comparison between China today and the U.S. If you go to the United States, don't travel on trains. Maybe New York to San Francisco, but you can take Amtrak across the country or anything else. It's not a good experience.